Hi, this is Richard from Regimpreneur, and I'm here with Jon Foster-Pedley, who is the Dean of the Henley Business School. And this is the second part of our interview. The first part, we talked about business strategy and how that serves to develop a more sustainable future. And in this meeting, we're going to have a look a bit more about developing a vision and how you can apply that to an entrepreneurial skill set to help achieve profitable outcomes on a farm system. Thank you for joining us today, Jon. Nice to join you again.
It's a pleasure again. This is a great topic, which I really enjoy. So I'm happy to discuss with you.
Thank you. Well, I thought maybe to start with, we could talk about some of the challenges of modern business. So I was hoping to kind of explore today how you can develop a vision and how that serves an entrepreneurial skill set to achieve some of the more sustainable outcomes that we can hope for in a business. But maybe initially, if we just look at the challenges that you can face in a modern business, what do you see as being some of those challenges?
I think when we talk about a modern business, I often go back to Peter Drucker, who talks about the timelessness of business. Or you go back to the early businesses in Roman times or beyond. Beyond that, a lot of the fundamentals haven't changed. If somebody makes or does something for somebody which creates value, and somebody gives you something in exchange, and that fundamental hasn't really changed. And one of the biggest challenges we have, apart from the proliferating complexity of managing businesses, the logistics, the complexity of working across global borders. You've got supply chains that you can fly and do whatever you want. You've got internet connections that allow you to talk to Korea and Rio de Janeiro and London at the same time if you want to. So it moves faster, it's more complex, but the fundamentals don't really change. And I think a lot of the challenges of business are in mindset and in centeredness rather than just in intellect. I think we have two things. There was a great book by Guy Claxton called Hare Brain and Tortoise Mind. And the hare brain is this like prefrontal cortex thing, thinking. The MBA smart, clever brain that's always got a million ideas, or the consultants, loads of ideas coming out to you and you buy. But then there's this tortoise mind that makes sense in its own time. When you're in a shower, when you're out for a run or whatever it is you're doing, this deeper sense making, it's always going on, even though you're not conscious of it. And you can help that sees and makes sense of deeper patterns. So I think a whole load of, when you look at design thinking, there's a wonderful design thinking squiggle, if you like. It's from a design center in London. And it starts off with a big squiggle and ends up in a straight line. And it breaks invention into three elements. The first element is discovery. It's a big question mark. You're trying to find, you've got some sort of problem. And the classic one is, how do you feed surfers? And what does surfers need? And surfers need carbs, they need protein, and they need it quick. And in the days when this was thought of, they weren't particularly vegan or anything. So they liked meat and rolls and quick. So therefore the hamburger. And somebody invented the hamburger, and they tried a million or one other things to find out what surfers wanted, and the people who got that formula right then started perfecting it. So first was a mystery, what do they want? And then there was a heuristic, the next stage of trying to work out how to refine that, and then you came up with hamburger chains, and then your final bit is the algorithm, well, with the straight line, where you turn all that into scalable production and profit. And at that point, Ray Kroc bought the hamburger chains from McDonald Brothers, because they'd done all the other stuff. And so when Ray Kroc bought them from McDonald's Brothers, they started the 57-step hamburger production method and all the stuff about properties. And he factorified, excuse me, the craft of making hamburgers. And it's quite a good allegory, because the first stage of the invention is about finding relevant answers to complex problems. What's the relevance? And relevance always about what people want. It's the context and what people need. And then the next stage is sort of refining it through a heuristic, which is trial and error. And the final stage is making it reliable, factorifying it and making it possible to take that idea and make it much more efficient, bring in logistics and accountants and lawyers and efficiency people and drive down costs and manage lots of profit. But what happens in that model is that it becomes irrelevant again. And so if you eat many hamburgers, you die. And so along comes Subway with a bit of sandwich in there, or along comes Chipotle later, or along comes, meat alternatives, or whatever it is, or vegan alternatives. And what happens is that the focus on reliability very quickly allows you to become irrelevant. And so as a system, it's not regenerative, it decays. And so you've always got to be able to attack the value you've been creating for a while and go back to the beginning of the cycle and question it to make it relevant again. And so you asked me, what is the problem with businesses these days? Well, a lot of businesses get caught in the end of that, where they're only focused on reliability, profiteering, efficiency. They're training up teams of accountants and lawyers and business specialists who are only focusing on that. So they're going to the big corporates to make them more profitable, more capable, not understanding the consequences that have been laid out on our lives, in our air, on our land, in our water, on our children, because of the effects of focusing on efficiency. And those people truly believe they're doing the right thing. They truly believe they have a vision for the company, and they've got mission statements, and they're doing really well. But they're not being forced to look at and feel the consequences, which is why we'll want to create our own homesteads and environments that counter that, because we have an increasing sense of disquiet, I think all of us, about this, and a massive struggle. And what the heck do we do to stop the system happening? Surely we can create our own permaculture or regenerative area where we can make our own little part of the world better. But we're all living in a big world. So the big thing about businesses now is huge, it's interdependent, and it's damaging. And it doesn't have to be. We have to reinvent that model, and we have to make it so it's sustainable, and we have to find ways to get 7 billion, soon 10 billion people somehow to collaborate on these in the majority, so that our world doesn't fall apart, and it continues.
Yeah, I might just delve into that a little bit deeper, that whole bigger picture strategy and that vision of how you kind of move away. I think you touched upon some of the factors there of how in a typical capitalistic society, you're kind of looking at how to provide value to your customers, and you're trying to derive an income stream from that. And I see an increasing kind of criticism of that narrative from people wanting to do things more sustainably, is that how do you factor in, and you're touching upon it in that last bit there, how do you touch upon shifting the narrative of that dynamic that's driving modern businesses forward, and how can you create a vision for how that business moves forward that considers more of the impact on the environment and society of just focusing on that profit and deriving an income stream. How can you go about kind of resetting that vision and thinking more broadly in a business and factoring in the impact you might have on society, environment from doing that business?
I think there's two elements to that. One is enormously complex and intellectual and requires deep analysis and magnificent graphs and beautifully trained PhDs like you to give you the absolute fine detail and nuance. But if you build a perfect premise on an imperfect base, then you are perfectly wrong. I believe in being vaguely right rather than precisely wrong. So I think you mentioned a number of things there. Firstly, value. We have to create value for consumers. Okay, well, value is all about relevance. I mean, what is valuable? If you are, you can sell cigarettes, you can sell excess meat products, alcohol, you can sell cars that people need. You're creating value for them because that's what they want. So they've separated themselves from their money and give it to you. So you must have created some value for them. Is that really value? When you really think about it, when you start thinking about vision goes beyond just imagination or just thinking about profit. It goes back to you. What do you feel? What's the truth for you about? What is your truth about what you think is value? What do you appreciate when people sell you things? What is it about that that you like? Is it the service you got that makes you feel better? Or if you're building a regenerative agriculture environment, then clearly there's something in you that says that is of enormous value to you to create that environment. How are you going to sell that? So what is the value for other people? They may not think like you, so they probably won't buy what you have, unless you can find a way to reframe and express and articulate and create experiences around that value that get to people. Firstly, you've got to, this is something of good value. I mean, I believe value should be things that businesses should fundamentally do, things that are good for people. That is, we can always do consumerist sales or addictive sales or whatever, hyper materialistic things, and people will buy them. We're not talking about that here, really, are we? We're talking about creating value through this sort of way of thinking that's going to be deeper and more profound and resonates right in our hearts about what we think is worthwhile in the world. So if you are creating a permaculture environment and you want to sell it, there will be a narrow slice of people who will get it and will buy it. There will be some who are inclining towards it because the world is changing that way. But the ones who will do well in that and be able to get more people together will be able to think further than just their own noses and their own self-absorption about what it is. So if we want to understand visualization and vision for a business, you can have your own vision that reflects your life. But very typically, visions at work, I think, reflect all our lives. They resonate with all of us. So we have a vision in Henley Business School in Africa. We build the people who build the businesses that build Africa. And that works for us because obviously a lot of poor people, we need businesses and they need to build prosperity, not consumerism. So that's our way of thinking. We don't really teach visualization, but we do teach rather trite vision making. You can download a bunch of templates and you can fill up a whole load of things and say, this is your vision. I don't buy that. Visions are messy or complex than that. They're difficult, but they should be succinct and they should be transferable. They should be comprehensive. So I think if you want to have a vision, you first need to visualize. And we often don't train people how to visualize. And how do you visualize? Well, it's daydreaming a little bit. You dream about what it should be like, and you literally think about things. You imagine. You practice your imagination. That stigmatized quality of ours, that the formal education system that's serving the factrifying of invention, to make it efficient, doesn't particularly like. It doesn't really need that sort of imagination because it's taken an imagination, making it productive. We have to reimagine away from the things that we're obsessed with to what that world could be looked like, without getting caught up in a sort of Pollyanna-ish or wildly magical thinking sort of model that is wonderful for us, but is very hard to implement. So visualization is uncomfortable. I remember visualizing in the business school we had, and I sat there looking at a window. I remember this day, I said, what the heck is a business school for? And I looked out of my window and I could see across Johannesburg, and on the end there's some very poor places like Soweto, where 2-3 million people, I don't know how many people are living there. There's 9.8 in Johannesburg and probably 2 or 3 in Soweto. And most of those people are really pretty poor, but they're smart. And it struck me that business school, in our context, the relevance of a business school wasn't to create an elite to serve the corporate machine, but it was to create capability for people to get out of poverty, make businesses and make better schools and hospitals and roads, and build the creative arts, and then stop damaging the land, and helping farming and change away from mass farming and mass mining into better use of land, vertical. So I thought that's what a business school should be about. It should be about helping people escape poverty traps so they have choices in life. At the same time, it should be about creating equity and fairness to build up a new society. So I think if you're going to visualize or imagine something, don't go from a textbook. Go from where you are. Talk to a few people. Check it out with others. Try and articulate what you're saying. Reflect. Write it out. it's hard to get to a vision unless you have some epiphany. Wow, I've got my vision, there it is. And the final thing, if you want people to buy your vision, which they must, or your purpose, or your whatever it is about you, then they must resonate with it. So it has to be right. And to help it resonate, you probably need to express it graphically or verbally or just in who you are, particularly by your behaviors and the way you deal with people. People get authenticity. It's, I know Sir Laurence Olivier, the famous actor from before your time, said, once you can fake sincerity, you can fake anything. But people get authenticity. So rather have an authentic vision and then work out how that thing is going to help other people's lives be better. And then work out how to help people into that through your products or services, rather than trying to do an MBA textbook, because you know what, they don't work. We're in an original space there, not in space that's pioneering space. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, in our permaculture course, we have a module where we try to explore some of those concepts, and maybe if I explain what we do there, it might it'd be interesting to hear what your thoughts are on it and your own maybe different approach. But we try to look at what are your particular characteristic strengths. So we do like a Clifton Strengths Finder to look at your strengths, and the Myers-Briggs for your personality type. And then we do like a mind map of what are the particular values that resonate most strongly with you, and kind of sketch out all these different values and how you can organize them into maybe 2 or 3 kind of key meta values that they're linking to. And with that kind of structure of what your strengths and your values are, then kind of looking out more widely into society with a pestle type analysis of what are some of the trends in society and what are the drivers in society. So how much you best focus your particular strengths to address some of those demands, and then look at, once you've got a kind of a product in mind, then doing that business model canvas to look at what opportunities and value you can provide to customers, and getting some feedback from those customers as to how your particular product or service you had in mind might best serve them. And then doing that 5-quarter kind of strengths analysis or competition analysis of how does what you have in mind relate to the competition that's out there, and how you kind of focusing on particular niche that might avoid competition with others. And then doing that the SWOT analysis. So what are the particular strengths and opportunities for what you do, and how it's addressed the things that those end users want, and so I try to explore it using those structures to help form the narrative of what are your particular values and strengths, and how does it interrelate with the demands of the end users to create that product and service. Do you do similar things to that, or a different approach? Or
yes, I mean, for many years I taught strategy in business schools, and I used numbers and models, and I became increasingly skeptical about it. I was lucky to work with a complexity theorist called Ralph Stacey. And Ralph Stacey wrote a book called Ordinary and Extraordinary Management. And he talking about the difference between self-management and self-organization. And so a lot of the models you use, people imagine they hold truth. So a Porter's 5-force analysis or a SWOT analysis demonstrates truth. But ask yourself, if you use a SWOT analysis 10 times, you get better at using it. And if you get better in using it, the model doesn't hold the truth. It's your mind, your perceptions. All it is, it's a bit like the blinkers on a racehorse. They focus your mind. You can look at one thing like that, but it takes away some of your peripheral vision. Frameworks help you, like the 5P or the 4P or Michael Porter's, competitive forces for competition, etc. Competitive advantage, all the things people imagine they hold truth. But if you go out in the outside on a clear night and you look up at the stars, okay, you'll see an awful lot of stars, right? Infinite, almost, depending on the night. But after a while, I bet you see the Southern Cross, right? and you see Scorpio, all right? And you see maybe Gemini over there, and then you'll see Orion, okay? And after a while, you go out in the sky and you look for Orion, the Southern Cross, or whatever it is, or if you're north and there's Polaris and the North Star, or whatever it is, you look for them, and then that's where your eye is drawn, and you're looking at the skies. And it's very hard for you to look at Betelgeuse or to try and find a nebula or something like that. You can't see them. So what happens is your mind gets used to seeing the sky with that framework, and you start to think that's the reality of the sky. But wait a million years, or even 10,000 years, or move a light year right, and the sky looks totally different. Those frameworks don't exist anymore. And what they are, they're training wheels for the mind. And they help you analyze, so you can see a pattern, you can have the mythology of the stars as many different cultures have interpreted in their own way. But they're not truth, they're a story. And most of these things are a story. So I think they're useful, and they're quite useful to help you think your way through. But when you take something like a Myers-Briggs, which is not a personality assessment, it just says preference, it's your preferences, and you do change on that. You know, the preferences you have about perception and choices about introversion, extroversion, judgment, thinking, etc., as you well know. None of those things hold truth, in my view. They're just guides for you. And to the extent that they take your mind away from what you perceive and what you understand to thinking you revere the people who have created them, or you revere the objects themselves, all they are, they're fingers pointing. They're not the thing they're pointing at. And so you can use frameworks, but you must never think they hold truth. So, and one of the troubles of blitzing people with frameworks, if it's too much, it does help people narrow their thinking. It gives them a guideline. There's a whole lot of perception they get with it. It can be very useful. But it's also, at some point, they become counterproductive because you start to believe their reality. They become dogmatic. So going back to Ralph Stacey, he would say that was ordinary management, an ordinary strategy. But he would say the difference in self-management and self-organization was that you delegated authority. So I am giving you the authority to manage yourselves. But self-organization came without authority. Power was taken, not given. And so that's when people, in fact, you can create self-organization by being very rude and autocratic, and people will rebel against you. You've created self-organization, not necessarily the way it's very comfortable with you, but they've gone off in their own way. And the implicit belief is if you're giving people power and you're telling people they must see things this way, you're holding their perceptions very much within that whole framework. What permaculture and other system thinking approaches does, it breaks that down. So can I talk about system thinking for a moment, if I may? You okay? I was
thinking maybe just before you do that, just when you're talking about the pointing to the star, so maybe just to rephrase that thought. So that's kind of like when you're using these business models and you are trying to get to an outcome where you understand your strengths better and the market values better. So those kind of frameworks that you're using, maybe similar to what Bruce Lee was talking about, pointing to the stars with martial arts. They're a way to train your body and your mind to be more disciplined and focused, but they're not the outcome of what they're the tools and the techniques that you use to train your body and the mind, but they're not the outcome you hope to attain. And it's not losing sight of what that outcome is. So maybe in a business, it's to serve society in a way that makes you feel good about yourself and brings about a transition in society towards something that's more ecologically balanced, or society more equitable in society. And in a similar way to a martial art, it's about trying to be more alive and dynamic physically and mentally, but it's not kind of locking into the structure of that martial art. It's just trying to reassess and think about what you're trying to achieve, and are the structures that you've embraced serving that or not, or how can you look at it with fresh eyes and reorientate yourself to move towards that goal again.
Well, let's take that example, and we take the idea of business models and all these frameworks we use, and you take the example of somebody who is practicing martial arts well, and has those attributes you've talked about the alertness, the consciousness, the situational awareness, that higher plane of understanding and consciousness, if you like. That's what they would claim. And you take somebody who's just come off a bender after the night, hungover, being eaten 16 hamburgers, and you give them the same tool, Porter's 5. Which ones are going to get the best thoughts, the best interpretation with that tool? Okay, and obviously, well, I don't know. I mean, let's say it'll be the one whose brain is fresher and alerter, with multiple ideas, who's thinking of new thoughts, who's thinking more. Or you're probably going to get a better use of that tool. So the tool to hold truth is just it's a tool. That's all. It's a knife. It's one of those, whatever, one of your Aikido swords or whatever it is, the thing you use. But it doesn't hold it. And this is a problem with a lot of education. We teach people that these tools really matter, and we forget to teach people. So when you talk about a vision analysis, your vision, the mission, you start being more intellectual. It's about pragmatics. When you're talking about external and internal analysis, you're doing great. You've got a bunch of MBAs looking at the external environment, the internal environment. You're using your pestle analysis. It's another framework of thinking to break down life into politics, economics, societal, technological, etc., environmental, and so legal. So you're saying that's the way you look at life. But what about people? What about empathy? What about heart? What about invention? What are the things it doesn't look at? And the thing is about all these tools, they don't look at many, many things. And so they come implicitly with a way of looking at life that's baked into them, that doesn't easily seek argument or contradiction, which is why they become very rigid. And a lot of entrepreneurialism is very unrigid. If you read Henry Mintzberg, he breaks down managerial work as being a series of interruptions, balancing planes. So a lot of this intellectual stuff is pure imagination. Life often isn't like that, and nor is managerial nor business work isn't like that. It can help us understand, but a lot of the things we sense best with are empathetic. They're in the moment. They're intuitive, and you'll see more and more tools looking at that. So
would it be true?
So I get that they're carters, and you can say that, but they're carters that come with an ideology or a perspective about business baked in. Forces for competitive advantage. Where are the forces for collaborative advantage? And what if maximizing profit isn't the way to build great businesses? And what about maximizing collaboration as a better tool to maximizing competition? So what we do with all those, and why I'm saying this is because when you enter into the permaculture world, all these thoughts are in the thought of permaculture and systems. They don't necessarily bend themselves to the classic model of thinking so well. You can use them, but you might as well read Rumi as well. You probably get as much insight from some Rumi as you will from Michael Porter, would be my argument.
That's an interesting example, because I was just about to say maybe the problem is just the lack of vision and how they're applied in any of those contexts, whether it's martial art techniques or business techniques or permaculture design principles. If there's no vision that's guiding how those particular techniques are applied, then it becomes about just almost mechanically following through and going through the procedures of using those models. But like what you mentioned with Rumi, he's very much more of a visionary, so he's not really focused on a particular structure of a particular methodology, but he's trying to open your mind to think more visionary about life.
But he's a meditator, and he has his practice, his disciplines, and so implicit in lacking in all these models and in most teaching about business is the concept of mastery. I believe you do a master's, an MBA, and people imagine you're a master. But if you take the martial arts metaphor, I believe you start at yellow, don't you? And then you go what? Green or brown, is that right? And then you go and then you get black belt, and then you get several dans of a black belt. And to me, it's like you start off with a white belt, you end up with a black belt. But as you practice with your black belt, you never, it sits in the sun, it fades to white again. And so the concept of mastery is when you've internalized all these disciplines, now you're working in the flow, you're absorbing them, but you're beyond them. You're just using parts of them. And so the benefit of using a lot of these tools is that they can help you on a path. But if you haven't got a vision beyond the tools to mastery of thinking, or mastery of imagination, or improvisation, or innovation, then the tools become great limitations. If you as a teacher, or we as a teacher, show people this is just the training wheels, but you're going to let go of those as you start testing them and seeing their limits, and building your own theories of cause and effect, which what great entrepreneurs do, rather than relying on the tools. We're only partially educating them, I think. So I love that idea of the mastery fading from black to white again as you become this almost transcended master. And I think that great business people should become transcended masters in their own sweet ways, rather than following dogmas and textbooks.
It's a good way to think about it.
And what I don't teach you about tools is that you need a different way of thinking to succeed in all of them. A SWOT analysis is very subjective. 5 forces is so subjective, but a lot of these analytics are more analytical. There's very little interpretation in them. They're both in analysis, and the capacity to interpret, analysis is far greater than the capability to do analysis. The so what? So what do these books of analysis actually mean in this context? And for that, you need a subjective expert to make sense of it. Paradoxically,
wondering how that might serve the higher purpose of business, and that with trying to address societal and environmental issues of running a business, and how that factors into your goals and visions in achieving self-mastery. Is it more, can you do that realistically, or how the old business model was all about the greatest benefit to society was just a business making profit? Maybe the new vision of a business might be the best service they can provide to society is just achieving their own mastery within their particular profession. And they might not know directly how that would benefit society or environmentally, but just by focusing on their own mastery within their own context, that will inevitably elevate society, just like how we believed achieving profit would do that.
I agree. I don't see why working in something we call a business shouldn't be a mastery of its own. The problem with that is we equate profit. We think that we immediately slip into the dialogue of profits and plan. So let's think about your land. If you do it really well, the land is well balanced, the water's held, your mulch works, your compost works, your chickens are here in their tractors, and your right plants in the right place and the right trees. You're using water well. You're minimizing resources to maximum effect. And the thing prospers year after year and grows. So the plants get bigger, the land gets richer. Right? That's a good outcome, right? And that's what profit should be. But what we think profit is somebody going into land, growing up a whole lot of things, taking all the apples and pears, selling it off, putting it in their profit, and squirreling it off to buy a little place in Dubai or wherever it is, or buy a bunch of Bitcoin and stash it offshore. And all the resources leave the context. And so we confuse profit with profiteering. Somebody's given us money to help buy the things we need to set up our land, and we have to pay them back. That's fair enough. That's fair. If you don't make profit or create value or create surplus, you're incontinent. You're making a mess. Your land dies, so does your business, and and somebody else has got to take your pain because you didn't run it well. And so some to bail us out, and that's not sustainable. That's deeply unsustainable. So when you reframe profit, what people ask me, I got to ask that, we've only got how much profit? Not making much profit out of that. So or they said, what about a profit? And I said, yes, I think we're making too much. And I was like, what do you mean? I said, well, because at the end of the day, you need a net profit. After you've paid off your investors, your tax, everybody you've got to pay, and then you put loads of money back into the system, and you have some surplus because you need some resilience and you have to cope for contingencies, and it's good to have some cash in hand as well. It gives you credibility and it gives you a sense of security, but you need to put that money back into the things that made you successful in the first place, because if you're not putting it back into the things that are growing, then you're unsustainable. And so when we think about profit, we immediately conflate it with greedy capitalists gathering it, but you need profit. You need to make surpluses, otherwise you're sunk. And so you can make profits by sucking value out of other people, that's your consumers or your suppliers, or you can make profits by bluffing people that what you've got is like magical and phenomenal, and you build a myth around it, like some motivational speakers or pyramid schemes. Or you make profit by producing really good value for people, giving them more than they expect, not just great vegetables, but you give them extra stuff, better quality. You teach them things as well. When they come to see you on your land, it's an experience. I mean, I went to see a permaculture operation in Vietnam. I'll never forget it. I went round, there's a little pond with a tilapia. There are ducks, here's this. It was this lovely little village that worked well. And it was beautiful just to see the organization, the sustainability of it. It was a wonderful thing to see. And I would give them money just to be there. And I think that when we think about value, we must go way beyond monetary value. People pay for experiences, they pay for understanding, they pay for relaxation, they pay for hope, they pay for your vision, they pay for the motivation you give them by doing things. They pay for a bit of paper, they may pay for your products, they may pay to bring their families along, their kids to see things, they may pay to touch the animals you have there, or they may pay just to be given the thought that we could do this in our land. So if you think about value, you've got to go way beyond, and this is where visualization comes in. And visualizations, a beautiful sister, and empathy and compassion. And I don't mean in a Buddhist sense of compassion. It's just compassion. Passion means suffering from Latin, suffering together. We're all in the same life together. It's the sense of I get you, and so you're trying to help other people. And doing the Kiwi thing, which is looking people straight in the eyes and seeing the human as a human is, the danger of that. And I think that that vision and compassion together, you start to visualize what people really need beyond what they can articulate. And that's what I think imagination, visualization is. It's not magical thinking, but it's deep empathy, and it's also deep self-knowledge, and it's also scary because to properly visualize and to properly be compassionate, you have to see right into the harshest realities we may be facing into. The fact that we may die, as Roger Hallam from Extinction Rebellion says, in our billions going forward, or we may not. Or maybe technology solutions will help us in the end. Or maybe both, but none of us know the answers. So I think if you want to build a business that's going to work in this area, you've got to build hope, and you've got to have discipline. You've got to manage your money well. And you can use those tools. They're very helpful, but don't be luffed into believing they hold truth. You hold truth. Nobody else does. That's the way I teach anyway.
I like that earlier point you made with the human scale nature of it. Like, I think you're using a permaculture farm as an example there, how I see it in ecological discipline, that people get often quite frustrated seeing that the impact ecologically of modern society, and it can be quite frustrating. But when you compare that to a lot of permaculture type people who are working at a farm scale and having that direct impact and seeing how they can restore that smaller piece of land back into health again, how rewarding that is for them. And it's just interesting. And how that applies to maybe businesses and how they can address some of the environmental and social issues, just how operating at that human scale and focusing on the mastery of doing what you do well and restoring the health and resiliency within the context, that human scale context that you're operating at, how that might be a good way to kind of think about the impact we can have and avoid some of the frustrations of thinking at a larger scale and how we can impact things more widely, and really just focus on doing the best within our particular context. And then as you're then going on, how you can really get a profit and make that business operation work effectively. But I think it's useful to first kind of frame your thinking of how can you have a good impact, and what should you be striving towards, and how does it guide your vision, And then with that in mind, I think that can really inspire you to go into the nuts and bolts of making that business operate effectively, but you've got that motivating you forward. And I think that's quite important. Without that motivation and that driver to pull you forward, it can be quite easy to get dispirited about it, or to drop something and move on to something else. You haven't really got that consistent driver that's moving you forward that you feel quite compelling.
Well, I think I fully agree. We talked last time about that little Venn diagram with the 3 essentials for business: a vision, which you need to visualize; a strategy, which is multiple ways you can get there; and the idea of a business model, which is the way you translate the value you create into financial and other forms of value. It could be assets, it could be people you've got, or whatever it is, or intangible assets too, whatever they are. And that becomes a self-sustaining regenerative spiral. The challenge, the challenge is that it's a vision is not necessarily, you don't always catch, if you're a dog, you don't always catch that bus. And if you do catch the bus, what do you do with it? But a vision should be something that inspires you and that really means something to you. A lot of people construct a vision, which is a vision for somebody else. I think I'm going to construct I'm talking about a vision. It's quite a performative vision. It's something they feel that other people will think is heroic and they will follow. It's more of a proposition to attract people, rather than what you really believe. If you're going to succeed, you need your very real, very personal, very true vision for you. That's the word. And it may not attract a lot of people, maybe because we haven't articulated it fully yet, or it's too wrapped up in your own self-absorption or my own self-absorption, rather than with the empathy of understanding what other people want, what do they need, and the empathy, and often what other people need is not articulated. You have to be quite an acute observer of people and an empath to understand what it is that people are yearning for, because people buy not through logic, but mainly through emotion. That's why Aristotle had his 3 circles of logos, ethos, and pathos as a basis of rhetoric. We think we need to be articulate in logical logos ways all the time, and we explain it very logically, but none of us are very moved by that. It's normally a post hoc rationalization. Ethos, who we stand for, what our substance is, mana in Kiwi terms and Maori terms, or our values, or our authenticity, the person we are, that we what we stick to and why, that respect you get, that's the ethos. And of course, pathos, we think we must cry ourselves, but pathos is not about your emotion so much, but the emotion you elicit from others through your rhetoric or your images, or through what they see in you. How do they feel? And it's normally the emotion that will get people to separate, their dollars from their wallet to come to you, or whatever it is you want. And you need those things, because those dollars only represent, if you manage it right, their appreciation of you and what you're giving. That's all it is, because you've given them a value that's greater than the dollars that you give, that they give you. It's that's the value, but a lot of that value is in non-financial terms. So you need all 3 of those elements to think about building a business model, or even in building a vision. And what the danger is when we start to build a business, we either become wildly magical and everybody's got to feel like I do, which they won't, or we get hyper logical, or you get a little bit too, on your chariot with the ethos. You need to balance all 3, and you'll succeed to the extent that the people empathize with you, like you, respect you, get what you're doing, and for your humanity more than you need passion, and you need to be dispassionate. You need both.
It's a good way of understanding that Venn diagram you mentioned, how that the structure of your business is like the logical way of explaining things. It's the nuts and the bolts of the business. This is how you need to have the facts and the figures to influence and communicate effectively with someone, or that having that spirit is the same as the vision, or the eliciting that emotional response is the same as you say, like providing that value to people, isn't it? And making sure that what you are producing is serving them in a useful way.
I totally agree with that. And so we can intellectualize those things. It's useful. And at the end of the day, if you want your business to be successful, we have to be, in one form or another, we have to be leaders. And I don't mean leaders of packs of people are following us. You can follow them. You can still be a leader. It's just about setting a direction which people get to, or belief system that people buy into. So you can't not be a leader of some sort. That doesn't mean you've got to be an extrovert leader or a heroic leader. You just got to set up. To me, leadership is about creating value for people that they want, and they go towards that value. You don't have to be the person they go towards. You've just got to architect a solution they go towards there. You can be quite humble in the background, but you've set the whole thing up, and you've contained those people. You've added something to their lives. Leadership is about adding value to other people's lives, not to yours, in my view. And I think permaculture solutions really do. And I think the people who are probably doing these courses are extremely self-aware, very capable. I've got a big vision for life, and they want to perhaps, have a balance the toxicity of the work by creating something beautiful and balanced around them. But then we can go further. Why don't we use those ideas in our work? And probably lots of them do. I think one of the big challenges about business is we have turned businesses into these intellectualized and these sort of almost a parody of itself. Businesses never were those corporate soulless things. Some are, but most of them don't work like that. They have complex shadow systems within them. They have complex people systems within them. They're mostly a complex mess in many, many ways, somehow held together with thousands of spinning plates, with people pulling on loads of elastics, pretending after the event that was all rational. And I think you can build beautiful businesses on a great idea like permaculture that people really need, by showing what it is that permaculture brings, rather than talking about permaculture itself, even, perhaps. I'm thinking.
Yeah, I like that approach. Well, one of the things in exploring permaculture design I like to think about is how that does translate to business structures and societal structures and your own life. And I see a lot of parallels. So if you have an animal on a farm and you're selecting that animal for performing well in that context, in a similar way to a business, you're selecting an employee because they have a skill set that contributes to what you hope to achieve in that. And then once you've got that animal on the farm that's performing well in the context, how you can support its production by providing a good environment that it's going to thrive in, how it interacts with other production elements on that farm system, and they mutually benefit each other and reinforce each other. And in a similar way in a business, once you've got those people positioned in that business that are going to perform well, providing them that environment where they're going to thrive, providing those interactions with other employees in that business that's going to elevate them all mutually, and how you can use those dynamics to reinforce production in that business. But we're often focused on the output of that business without the structure that supports that output. And the same in a farm, you're kind of really thinking upon quite a simplified production system, and you're really focused on the output and tweaking the elements on that farm to increase the output as much as possible, without really thinking about that healthy integration and design of that farm system to support that production. Because if you get that right, production often happens as almost like a side benefit of having that system nicely balanced. And similar in a business, I imagine, if you get all of that working well and effectively, you get a really great production as just a natural consequence of how you designed all the systems in that business.
I think so. I mean, there's nothing that I know or have experienced in business, even the most apparently magic or poetic businesses, there's nothing that's not being created with a lot of thought and practice and discipline and practice. I think there's about 3 elements of a business beyond the rational, logical. I'm not that I'm against business plans per se, but most business plans are simply, they're models for bank managers to convince them that whatever you have is worth investing in, or VCs. You know, clever VCs often don't look for business plans. They look beyond. There's a company here in South Africa run by a man called Alon Reyes, I know very well, the most successful entrepreneurial support company in Southern Africa, I know, and he's written books about why he doesn't use business plans anymore, because they don't sufficiently articulate the real things that people need to build a business. So I think one of the things I worry about is when people are approaching businesses, that we get object fixated. We say, there's this thing, I must talk about this thing, and I must talk about that thing, and I must talk about this thing, and I must talk about that thing. We talk about the things a lot, but the relationship between things, how this influence, does this influence this thing to go up or down or lower? We talk less about them because the things are tangible and explicable and we can easily talk about them. But the relationships are uncertain and intangible and difficult to articulate or even visualize. But the relationships between are the gold. Why, if I move this, will this thing go up or down? And why will this affect that, which will affect this and that and that? And so you've got a complex causality you're always trying to toss around in your mind. And most business plans, I think, are very linear and only have one or two stages of causality. And what great entrepreneurs do, they build pictures of their mind. They're dancing in their mind with all these things they're balancing. Hard to understand. I mean, I remember talking to the chief executive of one of the biggest financial houses I've ever seen. And I asked him, they had 4 divisions. I said, how do you do strategy, Mike? And he said, oh, he was a bit drunk. He said, oh, no, I get in Accenture and McKinsey, and we have all these reports, and they send reports, we cascade it down. Now I said, okay, that's great, but how does it feel like you as CEO doing business and doing strategy? And he stopped me and said, well, it feels like I've got this 4-footed animal. I'm trying to get all the feet to go together. And what he really did was articulate his mind, the way he thought about the business. He used all these tools of analysis, but it weren't the way he actually, with his deep understanding of all the complex interrelationships of how they work. And that's how system thinking can help you. If you learn to do system thinking well, and you don't think of it as just a dogma, you think of it as a way to train your mind to see more relationships, to deal with more complexity. And you also train your mind to differentiate between the symptoms of something and the deeper driver. There are very high leverage drivers, very ambiguous qualities of leadership, quality of strategy, quality of ethos, or whatever it is, that are the most fundamental things in business success. But they're not easy to explain. So we talk about the more trivial but lower leverage items that are hidden in all those boxes and frameworks that we teach people about. They're important. But the real secrets are deeper and intangible. You've got to go deeper. And I think that a lot of the greatest leaders have forms of reflective practice. Either they go golfing, or they read, or they write, or they have reflective journals, or they talk. They have people they go, and they have somewhere they go where they get multiple insights, and they can reflect on them. Because reflection is a uncertain and painful process, because you enter a realm where you don't know the answers, but they get used to it. And some of them, a lot of good leaders always get other people's opinions. They might do it by bullying so other people fight back in protest, or they might do it by being empathetic, but they all get some form of multiple perspective on the issues, because very few of the great leaders fully trust their own perceptions. They're wiser than that. They know that they need, multiple views to make sense of things. At the end, they may have to interpret them and make the decision, but they need a rich set of things to interpret. So if you want to be successful, get a load of people to talk to you, get some mentors, get advice, talk to people, experiment, practice, improve, experiment, practice, improve. And don't believe that the truth of it sits in those models. The truth that sits in repetitive practice, as it does in martial arts, or as it is expounded by Bill Mollison or other people in, the people that you talk about. And I think I think what you're doing is really important, because I think that if people learn how to do permaculture, they'll probably learn how to manage their businesses better, and maybe they'll return to a more balanced society. I don't know. Sorry, I got.
It made me think of something like in organic farming. There's meant to be in a kind of an incorporation and awareness of permaculture design type awareness of creating this ecologically balanced system and creating these organic outcomes on a farm. But because the mindset is so kind of like a traditional farm system, where it's just tweaking the output of the farm system and driving the profit for it. When it comes to organic certification, even though the intention there is that it's an ecologically balanced system, it tends to be more of a substitution model where they just utilize traditional farming mindset to create organic production, and because they haven't really been able to embrace that more holistic design methodology. And the same thing in businesses, how there's this big shift towards environmental reporting now in businesses, but it's on the back of that traditional business model where the only really accountability is a financial one to the shareholders. And when you try to bring in environmental reporting to that, it seems quite shallow, and it seems like just trying to pull upon what has traditionally been reported in a business plan and applying it to that context in a similar way to that organic farm example, without really embracing the redesign of that business to actually achieve those more environmentally sustainable outcomes, and just how there needs to be further effort made to really think about how that whole system operates and designs and is interconnected in a business and in a farm to create those more environmentally sustainable outcomes of production.
Well, I agree with that a lot, and you talked about those tools, and I'll be provocative here. While those tools are useful, you could say they are the methods of the enslavement of the mind into the old system. They force our perception. Underlying those are models of profit, etc., and they force our perception into those narrow ways. And I often think that the big problem with classical businesses is they've potty trained too early. They can't deal with waste and excrement and pollute. They can't deal with anything that's dirt. They want to leave that for society. So whether it's the ethical consequences or the physical consequences or the environmental consequences of their work, they don't want to see their own sewage and their own offshoots. They don't deal with it. Whereas permaculture incorporates all form of wastes, into production. And that's exactly what we should do. So let's understand the negative consequence, our waste products, and start to fully integrate them. We try and separate our mind from those because it's an uncomfortable feeling, and it doesn't feel very good in corporate life when you've got to think of the damage you're doing in the ocean. But we must be a little bit more grounded, a little bit more earthy, and we must come familiar with all our forms of excrement that we put out into society, and we must
well said.
And minimize them. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your time today. It's been really enlightening to discuss these issues with you. I think it's really important to, be guided by that vision and think about how that does influence our strategy and how it relates to the design of the business model or the farm system and guides us forward. Maybe to close with one question. We've discussed a lot about developing a vision and how it can be important for guiding a business. What might be a practice maybe that you could recommend to help move people towards realizing that vision in their lives or their business?
Reading. Reading George Monbiot, reading Yuval Noah Harari, reading people who don't get, reading and thinking. And then the other practice, as I said, reflection, I think is really important. And then try and put yourself in other people's hands. I think a vision always is about consequences. It's always about if I do this and this and I will get to that, and that thing is something beneficial. A lot of consultants, one of the things when you train consultants well, you train them very, very carefully about what is the boundary question which you're asking, because they'll look at a problem, immediately think they've got to answer this question. They'll go bouncing off. They'll do hundreds of hours of analysis and come back with great books of analysis, all founded on a wrong or irrelevant question. And so we do a lot of training. I do a lot of training with the people. I force them to think, what is the question? Is it too big or too narrow in scope? Is it relevant? What are the elements of this? Is this something you can manage? Is it real? What's the effect of this? Is this a question that is elegant or sufficiently, is it worthy of answering? Or is it just an escapism or just a platitude? And you force people, and people find it really, really hard. And I think doing that, what is the question you're trying to answer? What is your root boundary question? And then rubbish it, look at it, look at it, look at it again, and practice, practice, practice. I don't think, people say, give me your vision statement, and you feel, oh, what's my vision statement? Vision statements take years to come to fruition. Body Shop had no plan. They just had 2 waste paper baskets, one recyclable, one non-recyclable. And that was a vision statement for that company as anything that happened. So don't be fooled into thinking you've got to be articulate for some strange person. What is the thing you're trying to say, and how are you going to say it? Maybe it's a picture, maybe it's something else, but it's got to be something that resonates for you, that vision is something that turns into a system of action and production. It's not sitting on a wall. So don't try and be conformists and just come up with a vision statement for the sake of it. What means something to you? And if you've got it, then play around with it with a few people you care about. Can you improve it? And hold it with a light touch, because I know people, it's sacrilege to say your vision will change. I actually think it very often does change. It changes as you change, as you grow. So your vision might get even more rich. But it should be something that it leaves you, it makes your mouth drop a little, makes your heart go a little, beat a bit faster. Yeah, that's what I want to do. And it should be part of your mind. It's impossible. You can't do that. No, that's crazy. Okay, when you get there, when you hear that voice, you're getting somewhere, in my view. So, don't just be conformist. Push it and keep trying. There's no science to this. You're not going to be right or wrong. Just try until it resonates with you, until you believe it, until it's a beautiful thing for you, and then make it happen.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Jon. I found that really helpful, and I hope others do too. Thank you so much for your time today.
So I'm always available to chat anytime to anyone who wants to, or you. So if there's any circles or groups you want to have conversation groups about these issues, I'd be delighted to participate. I'm sure I would learn a huge amount from the people you're working with, so I'll be happy to.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay. Yes.